I want to talk about something that most of us misunderstand about stress. We tend to think of stress as just a feeling, something uncomfortable that shows up when life gets hard, something to push through, to manage, or obviously to try to reduce. But what I've come to understand through both study and honestly through getting knocked on my ass, those experiences that are really hard in life, is that stress doesn't just feel bad. I'm talking about the stress that's overloading the nervous system. It's soaking your nervous system with cortisol. So that type of stress, it actually changes what we're able to see. And that distinction is super important. In May of 2022, I lost a huge amount of money in the crypto market. It seems like yesterday when I think about it. You might remember it, what happened that month, particularly if it happened to you, you're definitely going to remember this. It was the Terra Luna crash. What it was basically is an algorithmic stable coin called Terra USD, and it lost its peg to the dollar almost overnight. And its sister coin Luna went to nearly zero, and it was I think a $45 billion market value crash, and it wiped out in 1 week. And I was one of those people that got caught in it. And here's the part that still gets me when I think about it. The reason I invested in it specifically was because it's called a stable coin. It was supposed to be the safe bet, the one that didn't move like the rest of the crypto market. But hindsight is 2020, and that decision looks obviously questionable now. But at the time, it made complete sense to me. And that's the part that I want you to hold on to, you and I, to really stick in your mind, that at the time it made sense. Because that's exactly, I think, what stress does. It doesn't announce itself and say, here I am. By the way, you probably should slow down and think about things. Your perception, it's narrowed right now. It just becomes your reality. That stress narrows everything. And after the crash, I went into a pretty dark place. There was a couple other negative things going on. I was already working in a job that I didn't love. I was living in an area that I didn't feel right. And this financial loss was on top of all that. It was like the weight of everything compressed all at once. And my world got super small, super narrow. The things that I knew helped me, things like my meditation practice, my positive habits, exercising, picking up the phone call and having a healthy relationship, reaching out to people, talking about what's going on, all of that fell away. Not because I decided to stop, but because from the inside, all that contracted state, none of it felt accessible. None of it felt like it could, honestly, when I think about it, didn't feel like it could make a difference. And I really, and that's what went on for the next 8 months. It was really, really a tough time, honestly. Now, I want us to pause on that just for a second, because what I just described is actually the mechanism of what we're going to be talking about in this video. And I think a lot of us have experienced some version of this in our life. Maybe not a financial crash like that, but a period where life just felt compressed and we felt like, life had its thumb on us, where your options felt incredibly limited, where decisions that seem obvious now, looking back, hopefully we can give ourselves grace, but they were completely invisible then. And here's what's actually happening, when we're under these significant unhealthy amounts of stress. Our system, it shifts into some kind of survival mode. Our attention, it completely narrows. The mind starts scanning for threats instead of looking for all the possibilities out there. And in that state, everything feels heavier than it usually is. And solutions that might exist, they don't register in our minds. Opportunities that are right in front of us, we can't see them. Not because they're not there, but because the level that we're perceiving them from, everything is just contracted, everything is narrowed. And when the stress is chronic, when it's not just a moment of stress, because some stress can be good to get us moving, but months of accumulated stress, it feels like, it stops feeling like stress. It starts to feel like our reality. Like this is just a normal way of life. The filter that we're seeing life through becomes invisible. Why? Because we're looking through it. We're not looking at it. And that's why we can make decisions that seem completely rational at the time and look back at later and think, what was I seeing? Or at the same time, like for myself, what the hell was I not seeing? What was I doing and beating myself up? I do want to say give yourself grace, because those are one of those things where there's definitely time that needs to heal from that, but you get my point. So about 8 months later, it was February of 2023, I made a decision. I went to a retreat in West Virginia where I spent an entire, I think it was about 6 weeks, meditating with a group of men. It was an intensive, structured environment, no distraction, just what I needed. So no noise, just the practice. And what happened there wasn't this dramatic thing, that you might expect. There wasn't a single moment of breakthrough. I think people think when someone meditates for that long, there could be those things, and there could be. But for me, it was more like the noise that I was experiencing, it gradually melted away. And as it did, I started to see things I hadn't been able to see. Not because the external situation had changed, and to be honest, it hadn't changed while I was meditating. My finances hadn't recovered from that crypto loss. The job that I really didn't love, it hadn't changed. But my perception had begun to open up again. And from that wider perspective, that wider lens, I could actually start to move again and not feel paralyzed. I could make decisions and see a path forward. Now, I want to make something clear about that. I'd been meditating for many years before this. This wasn't my introduction to the practice. This was my return to it, if you will. And I think that's something that's important. There's important information baked into that. Because even when we know what helps, even when we've experienced it working, a contracted state when we're super stressed out can make it feel unreachable. And in those states of stress, we stop doing the very things that could help us the most. Not out of laziness, but because from the inside of that super contracted state, that super contracted lens, it just doesn't feel like it's going to make any difference at all. So we stop doing those things. And so what does this all show us? Stress doesn't just feel bad, doesn't just make us feel like shit, honestly. It operates as a filter. It changes the quality of our environment that our thoughts and decisions are actually growing from. And so we don't notice because it feels like clear thinking. It feels like reality. And that's what makes it so powerful and so important to understand and realize, because the decisions we make in those states of stress, the investments we make, the relationships we navigate, the opportunities we pursue or we don't pursue, they're all being filtered through this contracted lens, through this narrowed perception. And that's super important to recognize in these states, because we're all going to be in those at some point. Now here's where things get interesting, because what I've noticed is that since returning to a consistent, regular practice, it's not that hard things they don't stop happening. They didn't, and they still don't. Life still has its moments. But I think it's more like the stock market now. It's a great analogy. Even if a stock has a dip, even the most resilient ones, the question isn't whether it dips. The question is, what's its support level? How does it get back up to that support level? And how quickly does it recover? Before, my support level was low in this situation. One significant hit, and I'd be in a month-long downward spiral in every way of my life. And I think a lot of us operate like that. One bad week becomes a bad month. One financial setback, one difficult relationship, one piece of bad news, and the whole system, our whole perception, it contracts. And that's a negativity bias, and that's how we've evolved as human beings. But what makes consistent practice, what you do when you have consistent practice, it raises your support level. My lows now, when I'm consistent in my practice, they don't get as low anymore. And when they do dip, they recover much faster. The duration, the frequency, the difficult periods, they get shorter. The peaks, the periods of clarity, the stuff that you're looking for, the flow, the momentum, it tends to last longer. Not because life got easier, but because the level that you and I are operating from becomes more resilient when we take the time to have our practice. The root, if you will, it gets stronger. And the stronger the root, it changes everything above it. So I want to ask you something. Is there a period in your life where you can look back now and see that your perception was narrowed or constricted, where decisions that seem questionable now felt completely rational and made sense at the time? And also at the same time, if you're in one of those periods right now, I definitely want to send a lot of love out to you and say that you're not alone. And at the same time, I want you to consider the possibility that what you're experiencing, it might be hiding a way out. It might be hiding sunnier days that can't be seen. It might be a constricted state of reality, because when the deeper levels stabilize, when the root starts to settle into healthy, fertile soil, perception begins to open up. Options that were once invisible can become visible and be seen. Paths that felt or paths that feel closed can start to open up again. And stress just isn't just a feeling, like I mentioned. It's a filter in the way that we see reality. And the work that we're doing here, it's not about eliminating or trying to get rid of stress. It's about building a level of inner stability that stress can no longer fully collapse our awareness. That, that when we're tending the root of our life, this is what it actually means, tending the root of our life. And I'll close with this, that, I'm wishing you all the best, especially if you're going through a hard time. And I'm sincerely rooting for you, because I know hard times, they really narrow perception and they can really knock us on their ass. And so if you're going through a hard time, you're not alone. Pick up that phone and give someone a call. So sending a lot of love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.